Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Atlantic Tales, when we'll hear from award-winning visual artist and metalsmith Jane Murtagh. Jane Murtagh is originally from Dublin and is an award-winning visual artist and metalsmith. Based in Clare, she is a graduate in fine art from Dunleary School of Art and Design. She studied for a time in Belgium and after returning to Ireland moved and settled in Cratloe. She works with non-ferrous metals using the techniques of repousse, forging, etching and gilding. She works to commission and exhibition, and her pieces have found homes in national and international public and private collections. Growing up, Jane's family wasn't one for museums or galleries, so she wasn't reared in that environment. However, she remembers going to her first art exhibition at the age of 13 and seeing works by Irish artists including Pat Scott and Louis Le Brocq, and that for Jane was life-changing.
I can still remember that feeling of walking through those big rooms in the RDS and looking at incredible artwork and realising that this was a life. There are grown-ups living a life making this and doing this every day. And I knew that I wanted that. I loved it. No, I wasn't particularly brilliant at art in secondary school by any means, but I was very attracted to the doing and the making and where it brought you in your head. And I knew that these people, that's where they were, and I wanted to be like them.
Not particularly artistic. You weren't brought to museums, as you say, as a child, but where did that spark come from? Was it that particular experience, or was there something else maybe burning away?
No, it came from that. It came from that. Without a doubt, it came from that. And then I was kind of a bit of a chancer. I was quite good at writing my own sick notes. And so from about 15 onwards, maybe, I'd give myself a day off from school and I would write my own note. And I would go into town in my horrible green school uniform, but I'd go to the Hugh Lane Gallery and I would go walk out to Ball's Bridge to the Chester Beatty, and if I had time, go into the National Gallery. And I never met anybody, I never met friends, I wasn't sort of up to diddlement. I just wanted to sit in those three spaces and look at the work, and then I'd get back on the bus and go home as if all was right with the world, and it was brilliant. It was the best education I had. Yes, I absolutely loved it.
Did anything else interest you growing up?
Yeah, then what happened, my parents had an antique shop in Dawson Street in Dublin. My father was involved in the jewellery trade and antiques pretty much most of his working life, and for 10 years they actually had a shop, a premises, and so through my latter school years I would have been going in and out of that shop. But when I was again around that age of 12, 13, 14, people would bring in their Georgian silver to have repaired, and now my father didn't do the repairs, but he would get it to a workshop. And in those days, in the early to mid 70s, there was a lot of workshops in Dublin, silversmithing workshops, Allwright and Marshall's. Jackie Siegel was a man whose name I remember very well. There was a lot of really interesting Jewish families involved in the business, and Dublin people. There was extraordinary engravers, and all these workshops were in very particularly the engravers, very old buildings around the city, like Georgia Street and off lanes, and I'd be sent off with the old plastic bag with the silver in it to deliver to somewhere to get repaired and then go back again the following week. But it was only when I went to art college and walked into the metalwork room I realised that actually I loved that environment. Now, I was very young going into those places, but I think I liked the people were kind of working there, were kind of quiet and slightly grumpy. I mean, they didn't make a huge effort to converse with me, but I think I was attracted to that. I think I was probably, a bit of an introvert, and I liked that. And And I used to just love going in and out of those places and seeing all the tools, the amazing tools that a lot of them would have made. Like, I've made my own tools. I had a great tutor in art college who showed me how to make all of these tools. I made them from a steel bar. And so these benches in Dublin, like in places like Allwright and Marshall, would have been full-length benches, the length of a big long room, and there would have been hundreds of these, hundreds of hammers, and people behind the benches in sort of brown coats, work coats, and you only realise how significant these things are, I think, when you're maybe, sometimes you could be in your 40s until you realise actually how significant that was. And it would be one of the reasons why I always did part-time teaching of metalwork. I did it for about 32 years, in particular in a boarding school in Limerick. And it was always very, very important to me to find the student who was maybe a bit, not quite left out, but like not sure what they're doing with themselves, and to try and bring them into opening them up to seeing a life in art, and a life in engineering, and a life in architecture. I mean, they're all linked, and they're all fantastic creative lives to live.
You were determined so to pursue art.
Yes.
Was there any pushback from family? Did anyone say, no, there's no living in this, there's no money in this, or was that even a consideration?
Well, it came at a funny time, I think, probably in my parents' life. I'm the youngest of three. So I think in the 70s, when you were self-employed like they were, things got very tricky with business. They had decided to sell up the home in Dublin and move down to Wicklow. They had said that, they couldn't really support me going to college. But rather than sending me into a pit of despair, it made me, oddly enough, very, very determined. So I moved into a flat at barely turned 18. I moved into a flat. I had a job minding children, which was just bonkers because I'd never had any contact with small children. I did that for a year, but all the time I was going to art college at night, so I was doing night classes. So I basically had to work out, okay, how do you pay for a flat and how do you pay to keep yourself in college? So I worked it out. I used to go to England in the summers and work in factories, and I always had 2 jobs throughout the 4 years I was in college. So yeah, it wasn't easy, but I did it, and I was determined to do it. I was determined to live that life that I so knew was out there. So when I was about 15, maybe, I just went out to Dún Laoghaire Art School at night time, which you could do. You could do the same in NCAD. You could do night classes. And then I applied and I got in to do the full 4 years equivalent of a degree. It was very exciting because in the 70s it was very hands-on. Dún Laoghaire was very geared towards looking at, we learnt a lot about the Bauhaus and theory of colour and form and pattern and materials, and we got to work in like graphics, painting, sculpture, stone, metal. We had some very, very good tutors at that time, and around the middle of second year, I think you could sort of specialise in 2 areas. So I took metal and drawing. Those are the 2 areas that I took, and I was just very comfortable working with metal. I mean, I thought I'd be going into painting all the time because I adore painting or looking at paintings, but really it was the metal, the actual material, that really got me hooked, and I'm still hooked on it. I mean, I'm still fascinated by what I can do with it.
So metal is your medium. Did anything else cross your mind? Ceramics, anything else that...
No, I did a drawing. It would be very significant to me. I did for a while think, oh God, I have to make a living. I'll go for silversmithing, and I did a certain amount of silversmithing. And after college, the IDA at that time in the late 70s were beginning to help fund anybody coming out of a college who was working with materials, like with their hands. It was just at the very start. So I used to go to the IDA office there in Bowlesbridge nearly every week and pester some poor unfortunate man until he did eventually. I'd finished college at this point. I was cooking in restaurants and I was doing an ANCO welding course, but I was just trying to find a path where I could be an artist and work at my artwork all the time. Anyway, I got funding to go to Belgium to work in a foundry to learn about casting bronze in an art foundry for a year. But before that, actually, they funded me to work with a wonderful silversmith in Dublin called Desmond Taff from the Dublin Silver Company. And Des was very, very, very good to me. As long as I didn't touch his work or go near his work, which was fair enough, he taught me a lot about hand raising and forming metal. So like there'd be a lot of silversmithing techniques in this piece, for instance, and a lot of the tools like silversmithing stakes. So that man, Des Taff, was very, very good to me, and I learnt a lot from him. But I had a silversmithing studio in Tower Design Studios in Dublin, which is off Pearse Street, and that was established by the IDA, and the Crafts Council were involved with that as well, I think. And it's still going, and it's still a very vibrant place. But I would have been in it in the very early days. And I was making bowls and spoons and tiny silver boxes. But really my nerves were shot when I was in there, because silver is expensive if you make a mistake. And also I wasn't a jeweller, and I think in the silversmithing game you have to be more versatile than I was, and I can't bear working with small things, so I never did jewellery. So luckily after 12 months I realised that was a mistake, so I was able to get out of it. And I knew that I had to get back to much more the visual art side of metalsmithing, that's where I was happiest, and that's where probably I'd be best at managing. And so I did. That's how I got back into doing this work.
It seems you were very organised, you knew what you wanted, you worked hard to get it, but how would someone at that age know about IDA, for example? Who put that in your head?
I think actually, I don't know, I don't remember. It might have been, there was a man called Frank Sutton, who was, I think he might have been one of the first people to run that organisation, like the Crafts Council. And it was it was 1979, and there was very little money around, and he probably was scrambling around looking for information of how people could get in some way to get some support. I'd say it was probably him put the idea, and I don't know where I got the neck, because I'm quite awkward and I'm not socially very confident really, but I just think I want this. This is the life I want, and I went for it. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. Because
you'd have those supports available nowadays, and maybe for the past decade or two or more, but in the early 70s, to have the IDA supporting a crafter, an emerging crafter.
Yes.
What kind of support did you get from them? I know you hounded them for quite a while before you
lots
wore them down.
Cups of tea and Marietta biscuits in that big office in Ballsbridge with a very, very nice man whose name I'm afraid I can't remember. I can't remember how it worked out, but they gave me money to support myself in Belgium for, I think it was 8 or 9 months. And there must have been money, obviously, to give to the foundry. Of course there was. And they did the same with the silversmith Des Taff. Yeah.
What do you remember of Belgium and what you got from that experience?
I'm sure it was a bit of hard work maybe for the person who owned the foundry, because I really didn't know enough about bronze casting, and I was learning. So he would set me up making sprues for the bronze, to simple jobs, before they made moulds, and they were working in wax and then making moulds and then casting the bronze. So by being somewhere that you're unfamiliar with and know nothing about, if you stick it out, you'll soak it up and you'll memorise it, but you'll soak up everything around it. So I did that, and I have gone back and done a little bit of casting actually in the last few years, and lots of memories are coming back around that. Yeah, Belgium was great. We lived in Antwerp and we lived in Brussels, and the architecture was really interesting.
Were you nipping out to the galleries every chance you got, like you did in Dublin?
A little bit, probably not as much as I should have, but my husband we were just married. We were married very young, and he was working for a conservation firm, doing engineering work, and we were looking at buildings actually a lot, and sort of soaking up the multicultural feel to the place. I mean, we lived in sort of an area that I think was kind of the Moroccan Quarter. I mean, that's all very different to where I would have come and he would have come from. And just soaking that up and watching and listening, yeah, that was really interesting. So I came back from Belgium, went back into the IDA, and, you know, they were doing this building and tower design in Pearse Street. And I thought, that's it, I have to do silversmithing because that's the only way I can make a living or something. You know, I got quite a few, gathered a few tools together. There was one silversmithing business in Dublin closing down. I remember I was able to go along. I'd missed the auction, but I did pick up quite a few stakes. These stakes, these are what I was talking about, that are in the anvil for forming metal over. So I between the jigs and the reels, I got benches. I got quite a few hammers sorted. And they said to me I had to buy a safe because I wouldn't be insured unless I had a safe. So I had to go and buy a safe, which was quite expensive. But anyway, after the year that I was there and I knew that it wasn't the right place for me, I was able to sell the safe but keep all my tools and pay back the bank, because I still at that point owed them like about £1,000 at the time. It wasn't massive, but, you know, at the time it was a lot. This was in 1981 or 82. And I had to work out how to pay them back. And the bank manager in AIB was called Bob Dillon, which is a great name. And my husband and I then, at some point in that period, we knew we were moving to County Clare, to this farm that his family had come into. And so I wrote to the bank manager and said, if I'm going to rear geese and pay back. So I reared 100 geese for the Christmas market outside, because there's a great big field beside a shed, and in the winter time that shed wasn't being used at the time for sheep. So the shed was there, the field was there. I reared geese for the Christmas market, sold them, paid back the bank, and off we go.
What put that in your head?
Well,
how were you inspired to do that? Was clever.
Yeah, because the land is the richest, such a rich resource. And I'm not obviously from a farmyard country background really at all, but it's there. You know, you've got to think of what's there. Well, what can I do? Can I wash dishes in a pub or cook in a restaurant? There's a big field outside. What can I do? And I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, that's what we did, and we paid off the bank, and all is good.
Coming up, we'll be back in Jane's studio in Cratloe and hear about her move to County Clare and more about her work. Welcome back to Atlantic Tales. Jane Murtagh is originally from Dublin but has lived in County Clare for several decades. As a teenager, she attended her first art exhibition, which made a lasting impression on her. She used to write her own sick notes just so she could get off school to visit Dublin's art galleries. Thinking for a time she might one day become a painter, it was metal that really captured her imagination. After spending some time working and studying overseas, Jane returned to Dublin. She and her husband later moved to County Clare, but she still had a bank loan to pay off. She cleared that debt after rearing 100 geese for the Christmas market. Her plan, of course, was to continue with her art and establish her own studio here.
At that point, I had begun to meet the arts officers. For instance, you move anywhere to any county, you need to get to know your local arts office. And they were extremely helpful. Out of some conversation, I did get a commission to make a large repousse panel as a memorial piece for the Ennis Chamber of Commerce. So at that point, I didn't have a studio. I didn't have this shed. There was a hen house, very bockety hen house out the back, just outside there. And I dragged a bench into it, this bench, and I just started working. And those people who commissioned it came to see how I was getting on with the commission in very nice cars and good suits, and they were quite shocked at where I was working. And I hadn't really paid too much attention as far as I was concerned. I was doing it, but of course it wasn't easy. But anyway, they said, why aren't you applying for some funding? And I said, well, I'm not running a business. I'm a visual artist. I'm never going to really employ anybody, so I didn't think I had any entitled to do it. And they said, you're employing yourself. You need to apply for something to get out of the hen house. So I did. So I got enough money to re-roof this. This was an old saw shed back in the day. And so I got money to put the roof on this, put a door on it, and off I went. And that was great. That was fantastic. And I've been in this studio for about 27, 28 years, and it's been good.
That Ennis Chamber Commission, was that one of the first big paying jobs you got?
Yeah, it probably was actually. Yeah, because after that I got these percent for art schemes that work all around the country, you know, where there's public buildings, roads being built up. I think 1% of the budget has to be put aside for an art project or an artist working in the community with the community. So I started to apply and get a few of those. Yeah, and gradually build up that side of my work, but also get me in a bit of money to start making works for exhibitions.
You had moved from the chicken shed into what is now your studio.
Yeah.
You're working with, is it mostly copper?
I'm always working what we call non-ferrous metals, and those are kind of everything bar steel. So I've always been working with copper and bronze, and I've been working with sheet, so this is sheet. This is sheet as well, and this is bar, and so I forge it and I work it from the back and the front, which is called repousse.
Is it because it's more malleable? Is there a particular reason why you like these non-ferrous metals? Yeah,
it's malleable, and you can form it into very, very lovely light-looking images, and there's an awful lot you can make it very close to a drawing, you know, very light, and that's why I like working with it.
Some of your pieces could be flat, like that one. Others can have shape. That to me is a leaf, I know, but it looks like it could be a mask. It could be an ancient war mask.
It can be 3D. You can work it into 3D. You can, and then the bronze, you can melt bronze and you can cast it. So it's you can really work it.
You have all your benches and all your tools you've gathered over the years. Some very old tools still serving their purpose.
There'd be a lot of silversmithing techniques in this piece, for instance, and a lot of the tools are silversmithing tools, like silversmithing stakes. This is called a stake, and
that's big and heavy.
It's very big and heavy, but this curve here is sort of mirrors the curve maybe that might be here. So that would be put into my vise here, my leg vise, and
the vise itself looks like it's a fairly old piece of equipment.
It is. It's a very old.
Still serving its purpose.
It is. It's a leg vise. It takes the reverberation, you know, down through the metal to a piece of wood that's fallen out down there. But the thing when you're working in this work, you don't want the hammering to go back up your arm, you know. So like if I was doing that curve there is very useful. So if that fits, so I would have formed that part of the leaf. This is a big hellebore from the woods that I'm making in metal. These are the repousse punches. So these are the tools that I made. You can get, like silversmiths and jewellers would have very thin versions of these, very sharp, thin versions of these for doing kind of like engraving type, sharper marks. Repousse work is you want them to be fatter and more formed at the top. So the best thing is to make them. So I was very fortunate because I don't know if the same thing can happen now if somebody wants to study metalwork in college. I'm not sure. I hope they can. I hope they have somebody who'll show them how to make these. So it's only really a tutor who's actually working in this game who would know how to make them. So my tutor, Niall O'Neill, didn't have a studio of his own at home. So he was using the bench in the art college and he was making big panels for a church door in Wicklow that were designed by Imogen Stewart. And this tutor used to actually work on quite a few pieces for her. So, like walking through the room and seeing what he was doing with that technique and the tools sparked an interest, and that's really, and he was very generous. That's the other thing. He was a professional, full-time maker and artist himself. So I don't know now if people are more academic now. I'm not too sure, but most of the tutors in Dún Laoghaire at the time were actually working. They were at it all the time. Like one of our painting and drawing teachers, we had Charles Tyrrell, who's a wonderful artist, and Donald O'Sullivan. They were at their work all the time and exhibiting in Dublin, and would bring you into exhibitions. Like Niall would bring me around old little foundries in Dublin at the time, like John Behan's foundry when he was working off Cork Street in a garage before he set up the big one with Leo Higgins called Cast and Colin Brennan. These people at that time were working in tiny spaces, very little money, but they were willing to show and share. And I was very lucky to get that experience. And I got it in spades. I mean, we all did. All of my friends who are all still working in the arts, still exhibiting, we would all say that we were very lucky we got a really engaging, generous teaching.
When did you start exhibiting? Because looking at the long list of exhibits you have done, very comprehensive. Just after we all of us left art college, like the Project Art Centre used to be very open to letting young artists exhibit there. And I can remember being part of a group that exhibited there. I think I had drawings in that because I didn't have a studio at that time. Then there was the Living Art exhibition, and that was a big one. And I remember being in that again, but that was a big drawing I did because I didn't have any of these benches or these tools ready, except my repousse tools. So yeah, we would have been encouraged to go for it, and whether we were up to what our standard was like is another thing. But the thing was, we were encouraged. So that's what I've always done. But exhibitions have been a very big part of it.
They are a big part, yeah, because I approach my work more from the visual arts side rather than a craft side. Though what I do is very craft based, like they're very hands-on skills, and there's a lot of learning in doing that. But the imagery and what I'm making is more from the visual art side. So I would be doing one-off pieces, and in the last 4 exhibition, and I have 3 exhibitions this year to work for, and it'll be new work for each one, and it'll be the work is very connected now to music. So
Is that a new vein you've taken?
Well, no, it's always been there, but I didn't tap into it enough. So about 15 years ago, I went over to Central St Martin's in London, and I did a course in drawing to music. It's around synesthesia, and I did that for that summer, and I realised this all makes sense to me. It makes a lot of sense. So you're seeing shapes and patterns from the music. And then during COVID, I was asked to make a piece of work for an exhibition in Kilkenny, and it had to be based around your experiences of COVID. So what got you through COVID? So I was very, very privileged here. I had a studio beside my home, so I was very, very lucky. But at the time I thought I would be going travelling. I was thinking of probably finishing up with my teaching, and I really wanted to go to the Middle East. How mad is that? But I really wanted to see artwork in that part of the world, and I thought, this is all I'll do now. Anyway, that didn't happen, and I'm outside walking around out there, and I'm thinking, God, I'm going to have to just look at everything again, but look at it in more detail and see what I can get from it. And it could be like, the ground, the lichen in the ground, the sounds. And I had begun to really pay attention to a jazz composer who lives in Ireland for many years called Carol Nelson. I was listening to her work while I was drawing, and I realised her work, her compositions were bringing me into where I needed to go with the imagery, because I wanted to become less literal in what I was making. I wanted to develop it further. And I knew then for sure that the music could do that for you. And it made an awful lot of sense when I think back to my education, because I think that's how I thought and saw, was through shapes and patterns and colour, and this is all. So I'm really honing in on a lot of music now while I'm working and developing ideas.
Coming up, we'll hear more about Jane's work as a metalsmith and how she got involved in teaching, passing on her own skills to others, including in one of the country's most notorious prisons.
So I would have formed that part of the leaf. This is a big hellebore from the woods that I'm making in metal. So I would have formed that over the stake like that. So that sound is the right sound where the metal is making contact. So it's very important you have to be listening all the time, because you can make dud, like that's a dud there. That's what you want.
Welcome back to Atlantic Tales. Jane Murtagh is an award-winning visual artist and metalsmith based in Cratloe, County Clare. She was fascinated by art from a young age and once believed she'd be a painter. However, it was in metal where her true passion lay. After moving to Clare and working for a time in an old chicken shed, Jane got funding to refurbish another farm building and convert it into a studio where she has worked for almost 3 decades now. She also began passing on her own skills and knowledge to secondary school pupils, but she had taught previously while still in Dublin.
Well, during art college days, actually, the VEC would be looking for students at the latter stages of their degree time to teach night classes and Saturday morning classes. So I did some for the VEC in Blackrock. That was all a bit mad, really. And then it developed, then when I finished college, well, I carried on, like, it's very well paid, I'm going to say it, you know, teaching and part-time teaching is a great paying boost to your art or writing practice. And I did about a year teaching in the training unit in Mountjoy prison, and that was like painting and drawing and printing, but there was a metalwork room across the corridor, and I asked John Lonergan, who was the man in there, a really wonderful man, and I said, what do you think about, could we do a night class of metalwork in the prison? And he said, yeah, definitely. So, like, I taught those men to make repousse tools. We made pitch blocks, and they did repousse work. Then when I came down here after, you know, and the children were kind of getting going a bit, the boarding school in Limerick, it's a day school as well called Villiers. I went into the principal there and I told him about a thing that the Arts Council had, where the Arts Council would pay an artist and pay the school to do a project, an arts project. So I went into the principal and I said, what do you think? Would you be interested in me doing anything? And he said, yeah, great, do something with transition years, but I don't have a space for you. But there was a bicycle shed at the back of the school. And I looked at it and I said, perfect. I made benches out of old doors that I found. I taught the students to make the punches. We made pitch blocks. It was not a very warm place. There was ivy growing inside rather than outside. After that year, it was like, it went well, you know, and they said, okay, see you again in September. So basically like 30, certainly 29, if not 30 years later, I was still there. But I had, at that point, you know, after like 10 or 15 years, there was a space inside the school. You know, it grew to in the afternoons as well for students who were kind of a little bit out of a loop or not kind of fitting in. Maybe they weren't sports people, but the last 10 years were the best 10 years of my teaching. I absolutely loved it, and I loved those students. I had students who had no interest in art, students who are very particular about, they're obviously, like you'd say now, maybe, they're great mathematical students, but they weren't into sports. But, I'd say to them, try it and see what happens. The whole notion for them to try and not know whether something would work would bring the horrors out into them. You'd see the colour drain out of their faces. But I was so delighted. I had some of those students with me for the whole 6 years, 2 afternoons a week, and some of them would come in on Saturday mornings. Like, they saw the freedom in opening up to looking and experimenting, and and I would talk to them about architecture and engineering and all these areas. They're so exciting, and they're there to be explored, and they loosened up. And that was definitely the last 10 years of the best.
Would you have spotted a student or two whom you knew would go on to great things, that they were creative, they were artistic, and they were interested? Yeah,
well, some of them went on into architecture, actually, and engineering. But I used to say, and I really believe it, that even if you never go into the arts, if you have some kind of creative way of thinking or seeing or looking, thinking around a problem, that's as important. And I do believe that, that's very important, and that's what the arts do. They open people up to thinking.
Did craft fairs ever appeal to you? Was that something you ever pursued?
Well, when I was in my silversmithing workshop, there was 3 people that began the Mansion House Craft Fair in Dublin in the early 80s. And because I was pushing myself into, I have to make a living, like everybody has to make a living, but I was doing it the wrong way, that didn't suit me. And I was making some silversmithing ware that would have been suitable for craft fairs. But I wasn't versatile enough. They don't suit me at all. And they never did. But I did always, again, my tutor told me halfway through college that I should enter the RDS Craft Awards, which was running for 50 years, and it was open to everybody from a boat builder to a silversmith to a weaver, and it was an extraordinary, like the RDS is an extraordinary organisation anyway. But I think I was in my second year and I did win an award in that, which was pretty great. And then 35 years later or 40 years later, I win the overall silversmithing and metalwork award in that, which is yahoo. That was nice.
But not something you would have done on a regular basis through your career?
No. I would have submitted to the RDS quite a bit. But I think I'm missing some gene where I'm not paying attention to the print or something. I saw it as an exhibition. I kept forgetting it was a competition. Yeah, I was so pleased to be there amongst some great makers, and so I like winning it. It was just like, wow, that's nice.
Jane, nowadays in your workshop here, there probably isn't a normal day, but what's a day for you, shall we say?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on about 7 pieces of work. So in the visual arts world, and probably in the craft world as well, you're planning 2 years ahead. You're working, that's the way, or certainly 1 year ahead. So I would have known in October that I was going to this great exhibition called Collect in Somerset House in London, and I had to have new work for that. I also have to have work for a gallery I work with for the end of March, and then I'm in an exhibition in Sligo in the Hamilton Gallery in July. So my work it takes quite a long time. It's quite labour intensive. So from October, I've been nose to the grindstone working on these works. I do commission work. It's not all the time, but the last 2 big commissions I did were for a beautiful Georgian house in Ennis, where the owners had asked me to make big new fire surrounds in repousse, and that was a lovely job and really nice people, so I did that. And then there was a hotel in Monaghan. They had money to spend, and they saw I was very much part of the Blacksmiths Association of Ireland for a long time. So they saw some of my work through that website, and they commissioned me to do a big work for their hotel up there indoors. I'm attached to a lovely gallery in Cork called the O'Connell Gallery, So this work that I'm working on now is for that gallery and also the Hamilton in Sligo.
Talk us through, Jane, maybe one of the pieces you're working on. As you say, you have 7 on the go.
Yeah.
Is that difficult, working on 7?
No, it's lovely actually. It's very nice. No, it's very nice working on at least 3 or 4 pieces at the one time, because there's times when you want quiet work. So I do 2 things with the metal. I do repousse work, which is forging the metal from the back and the front into a relief panel. And the other one is I etch. So I'm etching into the metal. So this is an etched panel here. So this is a very, very big panel. And I would have painted on a stop-out varnish. This is all drawn with this sort of black stop-out stuff, we call it. And then it's submerged into an acid bath. And the acid eats all the places that are exposed. So doing this work is really nice because it's quiet. And I can listen to some of the improvised jazz music that I like listening to. So that's very nice. And then you have this, which is noisy. And I have a little anvil there, and I have my other one here.
So you swap between noisy
and very nice. It's very nice.
Quieter jobs.
Yeah, it's very nice to do that. And like, for instance, this piece I would have had, I make these boxes of pitch, it's called. And this is what you need for the repousse work. So this is bitumen. Again, I learned how to make up this through my tutor in our college, and it's fantastic. So this is like bitumen that you heat up in a big pot outdoors, and you add plaster of Paris and linseed oil and rosin, and you cook it up and you pour it into a box. And I have to have it because the work has to be sitting on something hard, but also something with a bit of give in it. That's what the pitch block does. So there's one over here actually.
So you're not working directly on the work surface. There's a buffer between the two.
That's right. Yeah, so this is a big panel I'm working on in the repousse, and that's a big piece, and it's actually quite difficult working on it at this time of the year because the cold affects the pitch, and the metal sort of, there's a bit of a bounce back on the tools. So it's not a great time of the year. It's a bit of a headache. So I've sort of slowed down on this one. I'll have to wait for a few weeks. So,
but you'll know to the touch whether the surface is soft or hard enough to work with.
Yes, yeah. So I'm working on the inside of these lines. This is the back of the piece. So I'm pushing in between those lines down, so that when it's turned over the right side, like for instance, this is a big piece here that's I finished hammering. This is the front, but I would have been forging from the back.
Forging from the back to get the design you require on the front.
Yeah, and then you have to work on the front as well. You have to form. There's form angles, and it's called chasing. So a lot of the wonderful gold work in the National Museum from the Bronze Age would be done, using this technique. When they're working gold, they probably had it embedded in sand. They wouldn't have had this stuff. Though this does come from a tree, so maybe they did. I'm not sure, but they would have had similar tools. So anyway, the cold at the moment is making this very difficult to work. It's a bit of a nuisance.
So you'll leave that for a while, come back to it again?
I will, yeah. I have been hammering it quite a lot in the last, say, 2 or 3 weeks, but it's giving me my shoulder quite a lot of trouble because it's getting so hard. You get a sort of a kickback going up your arm, which isn't very nice. So I do that, and then that's a big panel I'm working on the design for etching. That there'll be 2 pieces that'll go together. And they'll be exhibited together. So
is your time divided between what you need to produce for the gallery and also for commissions or for an exhibition?
It is.
How do you juggle it all?
Well, I'm looking, in a way, this is a great time in my life because my children are all adults and living their lives. I've been able to, I was only ever a part-time teacher. I only ever did about 11 hours a week. But I'm able to give it the time. Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a great thing to be able to do, and it is a good time in. I think a lot of writers and artists, you know, from their 60s onwards, kind of can hit the ground running. And I just feel like that. I mean, I was feeling, should I throw my hat at it, about 5 years ago, and then, you know, it's very precarious. I mean, you've got nothing happening, and then suddenly somebody thinks what you're doing is great and you've got work, or somebody's including you in a great show, like the London thing was a great thing to be included in. And, you know, like a lot of people might get tied in with a gallery in their 30s. They're very smart. Those artists are very smart, and they've got that worked out very well. I wouldn't have had that worked out very well. So I wouldn't really have had any particular gallery sort of looking over my shoulder and saying, yeah, come on, that's great. But I kind of do now, you know, with this gallery in Cork, and it's fantastic to feel that happening now.
You mentioned earlier how you're kind of planning 2 years ahead all the time.
Yeah.
What is the plan for the next 2 years, and maybe even further?
Okay, what I've clued into doing in the last sort of good few years is through actually the arts office in County Clare. I got a bursary to go to the Tyrone Guthrie Centre. That's about 17 years ago or something, and that was brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant to get me going as well on a path. And now what I do is I go up to the Tyrone Guthrie Centre every year for a week. I'm given a studio, and I have my music on huge sheets of paper, and I work on drawings and ideas, and I develop those. So I always have something on the go in my head, but I firm it up going up to, say, Tyrone Guthrie. Or Heinrich Ball as well in Achill Island was very good too. So when I went up in October, all those ideas I had, I firmed them up and got them drawn on paper, is what I'm working on this year. But I'm plans. I've applied for a little bit of funding. Whether I get it or not is anybody's guess. But I would like to do a work on the seasons. So some of this work is winter. It's called Winter Wandering. And it's tied in with the music, the compositions that I'm listening to. And I would like to be able to go along the West Coast here and develop drawings and ideas connected to the music I'm listening to. So that's my plan for the next 2 years. Yeah.